Welcome back to Disturbed Reality. Primeiro Comando da Capital, or in English, the First Command of a Capital, is one of Brazil's most powerful and notorious criminal organizations. Established in 1993 in the São Paulo prison system, the PCC has evolved into a sophisticated, highly organized network that extends its influence far beyond prison walls, dominating various facets of criminal activity throughout Brazil and beyond. The PCC's criminal methods, which are both varied and adaptive, encompass drug trafficking, extortion, violence, and complex logistical operations. This video examines the methodologies employed by the PCC, analysing their development, execution, and implications for Brazilian society. Understanding Primeiro Comando da Capital's criminal methods requires a grasp of its origins and organisational structure. Founded by 8 inmates in the Taubaté prison in São Paulo, the PCC initially aimed to advocate for prisoners' rights and resist oppressive prison conditions. However, it quickly evolved into a criminal syndicate. The PCC structure is hierarchical yet decentralised, allowing for flexibility and adaptability. At the core of its operations is the Sintonia system, a communication and management network that ensures coordination among members both inside and outside prison. The organisation's motto is peace, justice and freedom, which masks its ruthless criminal agenda. While maintaining a facade of prisoner advocacy, the PCC has established a reputation for extreme violence and discipline within its ranks, ensuring loyalty through fear and rewards. This tight-knit structure underpins its various criminal methodologies. Drug trafficking is the PCC's primary source of income and a cornerstone of its operations. The organisation dominates key drug corridors within Brazil and across South America, controlling the flow of cocaine from neighbouring countries such as Bolivia, Colombia, and Paraguay. It achieves this dominance through strategic alliances with local and international criminal groups, logistical sophistication, and a decentralised operational model. The PCC employs several methods to facilitate drug trafficking. The group utilises a well-organised logistical system that includes land, air, and maritime routes. They rely on advanced communication technologies and corrupt officials to ensure smooth operations. For instance, the use of drones for reconnaissance and encrypted messaging for coordination showcases their technological acumen. The PCC's ability to infiltrate law enforcement and custom agencies ensures that drug shipments often go undetected. By corrupting border officials and port workers, the group secures safe passage for its narcotics and illegal goods. Violence is a central tactic in maintaining dominance over drug markets. Rivals and non-compliant individuals are often subject to brutal reprisals, ensuring a climate of fear and obedience. In regions where the PCC operate, they often win support of local populations by providing financial aid and protection, creating a sense of dependency that shields their operations. Extortion is another critical pillar of the PCC's criminal portfolio. The group runs extensive protection rackets targeting businesses, transport operators, and just general individuals. This method is particularly effective in neighbourhoods where state authority is weak, and the PCC fills the void by acting as an unofficial authority. The Caixinha system exemplifies the PCC's extortion methods. This system involves the collection of regular payments from gang members and associates to fund the organisation's activities. It's essentially a membership fee. Prisoners affiliated with the PCC are required to contribute financially, ensuring a steady revenue stream that supports operations both inside and outside the penal system. Primeiro Comando da Capital also employs psychological tactics to enforce compliance. Threats of violence coupled with an omnipresent surveillance network deter defiance. In some cases, the group enforces rules in communities, punishing crimes like theft or domestic abuse to portray themselves as enforcers of justice. This dual role as oppressors and protectors complicates efforts to counteract their influence. The PCC's control over Brazil's prison system is a hallmark of its criminal methodology. From its inception, the group has utilised prisons as both a base of operations and a recruitment ground. The overcrowded and under-resourced Brazilian prison system provides fertile ground for the PCC to thrive. New inmates, particularly those without existing affiliations, are prime targets for recruitment. The promise of protection, coupled with strict disciplinary codes, ensures loyalty. The PCC's dominance in prisons is maintained through violence and intimidation. Rival factions are brutally suppressed, and dissent within the ranks is not tolerated. For example, the 2006 prison riots, orchestrated by the PCC, highlighted their ability to coordinate widespread violence as a show of strength. The group's ability to maintain communication between incarcerated leaders and external operatives is pivotal. Smuggled cell phones, bribes to guards, and encrypted messaging systems facilitate seamless coordination. Prisons serve as hubs for extortion and drug sales, with inmates acting as intermediaries in broader criminal enterprises. Violence is not only a tool for internal discipline, but also a method of public intimidation and state destabilization. The PCC has demonstrated a strategic use of violence to achieve specific objectives, including a number of coordinated attacks. In May of 2006, the PCC launched a series of attacks on police, public buildings, and infrastructure across São Paulo in response to the transfer of key leaders to maximum security prisons. These attacks, which resulted in hundreds of deaths, underscored the group's capacity for large-scale violence. The PCC frequently employs targeted assassinations to eliminate rivals, intimidate witnesses, and undermine law enforcement efforts. And very often these violent acts are carried out in broad daylight. Publicly displaying the results of violent acts, such as dismembered bodies or graffiti claiming responsibility, serves as a psychological weapon, instilling fear and asserting dominance. Beyond drug trafficking and extortion, the PCC engages in various forms of economic exploitation, often preying on the most vulnerable members of society. Loan sharking, human trafficking, and the sale of counterfeit goods are notable examples. The PCC extends informal loans to individuals and small businesses in impoverished areas, charging exorbitant interest rates. Defaulting borrowers often face violent reprisals. The group also profits from human trafficking, particularly in the context of forced labour and sex work. Vulnerable individuals, including migrants and minors, are exploited in these operations. The PCC engages in the production and distribution of counterfeit goods, ranging from electronics to pharmaceuticals. Smuggling operations further augment their revenue, including the illicit trade of tobacco and weapons. In recent years, the PCC has extended its operations beyond Brazil's borders, establishing a presence in countries such as Paraguay, Bolivia, Colombia, and Argentina. This international expansion is driven by the need to secure drug supply chains and diversify revenue streams. The PCC collaborates with cartels and local gangs in neighbouring countries, leveraging these alliances to strengthen its position in the global drug trade. Sophisticated financial operations, including the use of front companies and offshore accounts, enable the PCC to launder proceeds and reinvest in their enterprises. In regions with weak governance and limited law enforcement capacity, the PCC operates with relative impunity, establishing footholds that are difficult to dislodge. Primeiro Comando da Capital's criminal methods have far-reaching implications for Brazilian society and governance. Their activities exasperate social inequality, undermine state authority, and perpetuate cycles of violence and poverty. Additionally, their infiltration of political and law enforcement institutions through corruption poses significant challenges to the rule of law. Efforts to combat the PCC are hindered by systemic issues including overcrowded prisons, underfunded law enforcement, and deep-seated social inequality. Policies that focus solely on punitive measures often fail to address the underlying conditions that enable the PCC's rise. Primeiro Comando da Capital's criminal methods are a testament to its adaptability, sophistication, and ruthlessness. From drug trafficking and extortion to violence and international expansion, the PCC has developed a multifaceted approach that enables it to thrive despite ongoing law enforcement efforts. Addressing the PCC's influence requires a multifaceted strategy encompassing not only enhanced law enforcement but also systemic reforms aimed at reducing inequality, improving governance and restoring public trust in state institutions. As Brazil grapples with this formidable challenge, Primeiro Comando da Capital's methods offer a stark reminder of the complexity of modern organised crime, particularly in Latin America. The reality is, in 2024, Primeiro Comando da Capital are one of the largest and most powerful criminal organisations in the world, boasting more individual members than the two most prominent Mexican drug cartels, Cartel de Sinaloa and Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación. They have waged wars across multiple states in Brazil against rival criminal factions, notably Comando Vermelho and Familia do Norte to name a couple. These regional conflicts have resulted in mass casualties on both sides, as well as local populations being affected and dragged into the violence. Much like other Latin American crime gangs, Primeiro Comando da Capital have been guilty of recording heinous murders on camera to scare rivals, law enforcement, and anyone who goes against them. Today, we will explore a couple of those clips seemingly released by the infamous PCC. But nevertheless, what happens in the actual videos? The first video is actually a shorter one, and quite frankly more to the point, for lack of a better description. The video itself is only 19 seconds in length, and it has been shot in a wooded area during daylight hours. As you play the video, you see the captive, who has been gagged and with his hands tied behind his back. He is laying on his stomach on the ground. However, his chin is resting on an overturned log, which essentially lifts his head up. A man who's wearing a yellow t-shirt with his face covered can be seen walking towards him, and he's carrying a machete. You hear the victim groan through his gag. It seems he's already been beaten at a bare minimum. He's already in quite some pain. The killer, with a machete, finally reaches the man. He bends down, kneeling over the victim, placing his palm on the back of the captive's head, pushing the front of his neck into the log. The victim groans. The hitman then takes the machete, raises it above his head, and with full force swings the blade down onto the back of the captive's neck. In one hit, the man is half decapitated, with a blade cutting through the spine. The killer then repeats the process and strikes down once more with the machete, and the head is then severed, rolling away from the torso. A loud, disturbing noise of exhaling air is then made from the decapitated torso, a long wheezing sound that is mixed with the sounds of flowing blood. The person filming then walks over to the decapitated head, and he bends down to get a closer look. The camera focuses on the face of the severed head, and you see the eyes move from left to right, followed by the eyes moving down. The eyes look so animated that it actually gives the impression that the severed head was somehow still conscious, though of course this is impossible. It's an extremely disturbing sight. Having said that, compared to the next clip, as bad as this one is, it pales in comparison when it comes to the suffering experienced by the victim. The next clip, once again filmed by Primeiro Comando da Capital, is actually a two-part video. One part details torture, and the other part detailing the execution and evisceration of said victim. The first section of the video is 2 minutes and 49 seconds in length, and the first part has been filmed seemingly in a house, possibly a PCC safe house. You see the victim, who is a young man, probably in his late teens or very early 20s. He's sitting on a chair, and it actually looks as if he's been duct taped onto the chair to stop him bolting. There are seemingly multiple other people in the room behind the camera, as you can hear several voices. A man can be heard asking the victim questions. The young captive looks up, but doesn't answer. A man can then be seen reaching towards the victim's ear, and he grabs it with one of his hands. You can guess what happens next. The hitman then slices off the captive's ear. Pain is etched upon the young man's face. He holds his mouth open as if he wants to scream, but no noise comes out. He tries to remain stoic, but his face demonstrates the pain in which he is feeling. The hitman then holds the ear in front of the camera for a short while, before the victim is seemingly forced to make an address. The captive declares any Comando Vermelho members who are found in PCC territory will meet a similar, if not worse, fate. The killer then hands the severed ear to the victim, and he forces him to then place it in his mouth, which he does. At this point, the poor victim is on the verge of tears. He holds the severed ear in his mouth for a couple of seconds before pulling it back out. The hitman then reaches for the other ear and cuts it off the side of his head. The sounds of pain made by the victim at this point are heartbreaking. They're not screams, but he makes sounds like he wants to burst into tears. The killer then places the severed ear into the victim's hand, and the captive then holds it in his palm for the camera. Several men can be heard laughing in the background as the victim looks like he wants to vomit. The sides of the man's neck and face are covered in blood, as is his shirt. It's completely sodden. Every time one of the men makes a movement towards the victim, it makes him physically flinch. He's terrified. The captive is then forced to again disavow Comando Vermelho, and in the last 20 seconds or so of the first video, the victim is then forced to eat one of his severed ears. It's horrible. He places the ear in his mouth and chomps down on it, while still holding it in one hand. He pulls the ear to tear chunks off it, due to it being tough. He can be visibly seen swallowing chunks of his own ear. The video ends. The second video is also 2 minutes and 49 seconds in length, however this time it's shot outside. It's filmed during nighttime in a jungle location. The victim can be seen sitting on the ground, covered in blood due to his previous torture. The expression on the victim's face has changed. He looks shell-shocked, and like he's totally given up. The white of his eyes, in contrast with the pitch-black night sky, is haunting. Several people can be heard talking in the background. A hitman then moves in and grabs the victim by the hair as he is sitting on the ground, and the captive just looks up at his eventual killer. The hitman continues to hold the victim by the hair for a few seconds, before he then places a blade against the victim's throat, and he then slices back and forth. You hear a groan of pain, before the victim collapses onto his back. It looks as if the captive seizes up as his throat is being cut. Once the windpipe has been sliced though, the killer leaves the victim for a few seconds laying on the ground, struggling for breath as he bleeds profusely. The captive then appears to momentarily pass out. The killer then resumes to cutting the man's throat. The blade in a few seconds more or less reaches the spinal cord, before all of a sudden, the victim develops the sudden urge to fight for his life. He grabs the hitman's hands and instinctively pushes them away from him to stop the cutting. This actually startles the killer for a few seconds. The killer backs off as the victim lays on the ground with an arm outstretched, trying to fend off his attackers. The sounds of bubbling blood and wheezing are getting louder and louder by this stage. Somebody else then takes a machete and pokes the victim in the stomach with it. Again, instinctively, the victim grabs the machete blade with his bare hands. Again, the killer backs off. The victim, despite losing an insane amount of blood, seems to be developing more fight. He frantically looks around, keeping his arms outstretched to attempt to fend off any potential attackers. Out of nowhere, however, another hitman enters the fray, carrying a rusty wood splitting axe, and he then swings the blade several times down onto the man's neck, and on the last hit, the axe actually gets stuck into the victim's spine. The killer, who attempted to behead the victim with the knife, then lifts the victim's shirt, and he begins cutting into the man's stomach, opening up the victim's abdominal area. The captive's arms are still moving at this point, but I think by this stage, it's more nerves than him actually still being alive. The man's stomach is then ripped open, and you literally hear the skin tearing. Once the man's stomach has been cut open, the killer plunges his hand into the cavity, before then pulling out a handful of intestines. He continually then uses his hand to rummage around inside the victim's body, before the video then ends. Without doubt, this is up there with some of the worst videos from Brazil that I've seen. The prolonged torture and murder of the victim was incredibly hard to watch. It's bloody, cruel and savage, which ultimately is a trademark of Brazilian criminal factions such as Primeiro Comando da Capital. But anyway, that is the video. I hope you enjoyed it, if you can enjoy this sort of content. This is the last video before Christmas, of course, so anybody who celebrates Christmas, hopefully you have a great one, enjoy yourselves, forget about this sort of content, and yeah guys, have a great time. This might be my last video until New Year, I'm not sure yet, we'll see how things pan out. I may try and get a stream done though in between now and end of the year, we shall see. I will be streaming over on Twitch, however, intermittently, so if you're interested, if you could follow me on Twitch, link in the pinned comment, that would mean a lot. Trying to grow the Twitch channel has been definitely a challenge, but it's good fun. But yeah, as always guys, stay safe, have a great Christmas, and as always, I'll catch you on the next one.